Hey there, YouTube land. Today we're going to work on a Mitchell 300A. So before we get started, I'm just going to go over the tools you'll need. You'll need a small flathead screwdriver. I actually happen to have two that I like to use for this. Kind of a medium-sized flathead screwdriver. And a 12mm socket. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the spool off and also make sure you have a tray for your parts. Then we're going to take the handle off, backing it out clockwise like I showed you in my video on the 308A. And then we're going to take the side plate off by removing the 3 side plate screws. And while I disassemble this, I will explain what makes a 300A different from a 300. The first video I ever made with the 300A, I briefly went over this, but this will kind of be a more detailed look at the differences. Excuse me. So okay, now that we have those out, we can take the side plate off. And so your side plate gears will look like this. Now, right off the bat, you can already see two differences between this and a regular 300. The 300A has a plastic gasket that goes between the side plate and the main housing. And the pinion drive gear is bigger on the 300A than the regular 300, and it's shaped differently. This is more of a circular shape. On a regular 300, the pinion drive gear will be shaped more like a star. So we'll take the gasket off. Now, the idea behind Mitchell adding the gasket to the 300A was to keep water from intruding into the case. So, anyway, so now we're going to take the gears off. Now with these bigger Mitchell reels, like your 300s, your 400s, your 410s, you do want to be careful, as well as like the 330 and the 440. When you take the pinion drive gear off, there is a series of shims underneath, as you can see. And what I like to do is when I take these off, I like to put them in the order I take them off. So I'm just going to set them down on my little tray or my board here. That way I know what way to put them back on when I go to reassemble. And we'll put the gear in the parts tray. Do be careful not to lose these shims. They're very important because of the tolerances of these reels. And when we get to the rotor, I'm going to show you another set of shims to be aware of. So next thing we got to do is we'll take the oscillation gear out. And then we'll take the oscillation slide out, like so. And then we take the axle shaft out. And now we have the oscillation guide plate, I think is what this is called. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. I don't really know the proper name of the parts. If any of you know the proper names of these parts or whatever, feel free to leave it in the comments section below. So you just have to take these two screws off. There we go. Put those in the parts tray. Now I have already cleaned and serviced this reel, but obviously if you're just getting into this reel, you want to make sure you clean the parts off. So now we're at the rotor, where we have the baffle plate inside. But before I take the rotor off, I do want to show you something. There is a screw in the back side of the housing. I think it's to serve as a lubrication port. You can take that out, but usually, unless it's a really dirty reel, it's not necessary. So I figured I'd show you that. Now back to the rotor. So we're going to like I said, you have to have a 12mm socket. And you want to use a socket and not a regular wrench because of the cupped rotor. You won't be able to reach that. Now Mitchell did make a tool for taking the rotor nut off these. And if you have that, feel free to use it. If you don't, you can buy them on eBay, but they're kind of expensive. But they're not necessary. All you need is a 12mm socket. I have it set the wrong way. Sorry guys, I'm just trying to not knock my phone over. There we go. Okay. Once you break it loose, you can take it off with your fingers. So we'll put that in our tray. Then you can pop the rotor off. Now, unlike on a standard 300, on the 300A, there's no, at least on this one, there's no rotor shims underneath. If you have a standard 300 or even a 400, you do find there's sometimes a series of shims under there. But on the 300A, you don't have to worry about that because inside the gear, and that's not a shim, that's just a bushing they put inside the gear. That's what they call the oil light bearing. So now what we can do is we can take the baffle plate off. As you can see, there's another series of shims under the baffle plate. That's to keep your rotor turning smoothly. And just as with the ones under the pinion drive gear, or the rotor drive gear, I like to take these off and put them in the order that they come off. So that way I know how to put them back in the order. Or, the order to put them back in. So we'll put that in there. Now, one thing I forgot to do was finish disassembling the side plate. So we take this gear off, which helps drive your oscillation gear. Take the main gear out, like so. And then we take the anti-reverse dog out. Now there is a little flat spring, as you can see right there. So do be careful with that, but just kind of wiggle it off and it comes off like that. And now our reel is pretty much completely disassembled. If you wanted to, you could take the bail off and take the trip lever out. However, I don't recommend doing that unless you need to replace them. In this case, we do not, so we're going to leave it alone. And now the reel is, now it's time for reassembly. So, we're going to start with the side plate. And I'm going to put the shims back in first, again, putting them in the order that I took them off. Or in the reverse order, I should say. Again, be careful not to lose these. There we go. Now I'll put the main gear back in. Slide the pinion drive gear back on. And then we'll put the anti-reverse dog back in. When you do this, you slip it on the peg and then you slide the little spring under the side plate. And now you can kind of see how that works. Take this gear and slide it back onto the peg like so. Now your side plate gears are all reassembled. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the gasket on there because there's a very important thing to remember with the gasket. So on one side it has like an M shape. On the other side it's flat. The M shape goes into this crevice or slot in the side plate. So you just slide on like that. And we're going to put this to the side for now. Now we're going to reassemble, put the rotor back on. So you just slide it on like so. Take our shims and reassemble them in the reverse order that we took them off. And these are pretty important because they reduce the play in your rotor. Because if you have an excessive amount of play in this, I've explained this in another video, it prematurely wears the gears. So now we put the baffle plate back on. Now if you notice in that post, I'm not sure how well this is going to pick it up, but there is a slot in there. And there's a tab in the hole in the baffle plate. So you have to line those up to get it properly installed. Now we can put our rotor nut back on, turning it clockwise. So this is a traditional thread. Once I get it lined up. And what you do is, I kind of like to go in reverse sometimes with these till I feel the threads kind of line up. And then once I feel that, just turn it, finger tighten it as much as you can. And then we snug it down with the socket. And you only have to snug it, you don't have to absolutely torque it. And that, just snug, and that's good. Give it a spin, make sure it's functioning right, which it is. Now we'll put our oscillation guide plate back in, like this. And then we'll put those screws back in. Now these can be a little tricky. If you want to use a magnetic screwdriver for this, that's probably helpful. You can also put a small dab of grease on your screwdriver when you do it, but I just use my fingers. Because you have to line up the holes just right. Okay. So now we take the screwdriver and tighten those down. Sometimes, once you get it started, it's not so bad. Now don't tighten one all the way down before the other. Get them to about an even level. Then you can tighten them down the rest of the way so they're even. Like that. And now we could put the axle shaft back in. Like this, like so. And now we could put our oscillation plate back in. So there, you'll notice there's a stud on the back of this, and there's a hole in the axle shaft. So you want to line those up and install it like so. Now we take the oscillation gear. Now there's 3 prongs, I call it a paw, on the back, and they line up with the slots in the oscillation plate. There's a lot of ways you can do this. One way I used to do it was I would put this to the middle and line up the paws on one side. See? And it worked this time. Another way to do it is you could slide the plate to the bottom, and then you go with the prongs down and line it up, and you can do it that way. So as long as you get this to where it's moving up and down freely, like this, will work. As long as it's like that, it's good. Now we can put the side plate back on, making sure we line up the gasket right. So just kind of work it on there, like that. We'll put our 3 side plate screws back in. Now I like to get them started by hand, just so that way they don't fall out on me. And we'll tighten these back down. I use my little slightly wider little flathead screwdriver for this. And kind of like with the oscillation guide screws, you don't want to really tighten one down before the others, because you want to make sure they're all lined up and about at an even level. Then you can tighten them down the rest of the way, just so it's more of an even torque. So, here we go. There we go. There we go. Now we can just put the spool back on like so. You can disassemble the spool if you want, however it's not really necessary since it only really has a Teflon drag washer, so lubrication is not required. If you have a really dirty spool though, then you may want to disassemble it to clean it. This one's already cleaned. And then we'll put the handle back on, turning it counterclockwise, like so. And there we go. Test the anti-reverse, make sure it's on and it works. Flip it off. Alright, test the bail. There we go. If you guys do want to see a bail reset video, there's already some good ones out there, but if you want to see one of mine, feel free to let me know in the comments. I hope this video was helpful, and if you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Have a good day.